Welcome back to the Altars and Ashes podcast, where we believe the Lord's kingdom still advances, the fire still burns, and God is rebuilding his people through households of faith. Big disappointment, Fleming.
I'm Austin Tucker.
And I'm Robbie Stringer.
And today we're going to talk about pastoral culture, the cultural mandate, and where we aim the obedience of saints. So, gents, over the last couple of days, we've been having a conversation. It's come up multiple times, and we thought, you know what, we need to record on this and talk about it, right? So, there is actually, before we start, how you guys doing? Sorry, we hadn't even really talked that much this morning.
I feel like I haven't seen you in like 3 days.
Well, you look better this morning.
Oh,
yesterday you were struggling.
I was. Too much sugar, too much smoke.
Tell them about the dinner we had.
Oh, my soul. So what is the name of that place?
Ginza.
The only thing, I was a little worried because right next door to this Japanese hibachi place was a puppy palace.
You don't want to eat your hibachi next to the puppy place?
No Asian restaurants are allowed to be next to cat places or dog places.
You are such a stereotypical person. I can't believe you would do that.
Call me racist, but hey.
You're racist.
Hey.
We usually do.
Yeah. We get into this place. $30, well, 30-something a head.
$31.95, just to be exact. Yeah,
$30 a head, and all you could eat hibachi, all you could eat sushi.
Yeah,
we
legitimately were so confused because we were like, this can't be the case. You're saying I can get all the hibachi I want, all the sushi I want, all the desserts and appetizers I want for $31.
It's really brilliant too because sushi's expensive.
Yeah.
Like 2 or 3 rolls would be $30.
Yeah, we're talking specialty rolls. We're talking sashimi.
Yeah.
I'm getting excited talking about it right now.
I want to go back, but I don't think my heart would explode.
We actually had to call EMS to get us out.
Oh,
so,
dude. And it's a good thing we had Brother Vic with us, that big old truck. I don't think a car could have hauled us back home.
No, we needed at least 2 tons.
Yeah.
2
bad,
because we weighed 2 tons at that point. It was mainly Robbie.
Yeah.
I don't eat sushi.
You did some damage though.
Yeah, I ate some. Well, the thing is, when you spend that much money, you feel like you have to eat your money's worth.
You do. Yep. Otherwise, you're a loser.
Colin looked at me, looked at the price. I was like, son, this is one of those, we're not together like this. We're just the men.
Yeah.
Are you sure? I go, yeah. And then he turned around and ordered water, and it made this dad's heart proud. You know? I was like, that's my boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that was a good dinner.
It was good. It was maybe a once a year type thing though, huh?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, you like that all the time. All right, yeah. So setting it up, there's been a ongoing conversation in Reformed and conservative circles that usually gets flattened. Like on one side, you have pastors and who are in the public sphere. They're accused of being too Christian nationalists because they're focused on laws and culture and the nation and public life, right? And they use a lot of dominion language. On the other side, you've got pastors who insist that their responsibility ends at the church door, right? Preach the word, administer the ordinances, shepherd the flock, and then, whatever happens outside of the church happens. And I'm generalizing a little bit here, obviously. Those are caricatures. But there is a real tension sort of that builds up, and it's almost like you have to do politics or you have to do preaching, and you can't be both. And so wanted to talk about that. What do you guys think? Is my caricature really far off, or is it fairly close?
I think part of that's hard to define because there's such a wide spectrum of beliefs on this, and it can also get very emotional when people have a different view on it. But I do think it is an important conversation to have, in that, just to kind of go back of what you were saying, is that does the influence of the church, should it just be in the church? Or does it influence the rest of society? Do we need to draw a very strict line between those two? If not, exactly what would the relationship be there?
I think it's more than that. The question for the Christian is, if Jesus is in fact king of all, should we as Christians declare that all the world should bow to Christ? The governments, the churches, the individual families. Now, this goes hand in hand with our 3 spheres of authority, 3 spheres of government we talked about: the family, the civil, the government, and the church. So I would say God is head over all, and I don't think any one of us are advocating for one of those spheres controlling the other sphere.
No, we're not.
Would you advocate?
Can you repeat it? Sorry, I was dealing with some technical difficulties there.
So, like when we're talking about this, the question is do we believe Christ is king over all and that we should declare that Christ is king over all? And I said, I don't think that necessarily means that we're advocating outside, because we did that podcast earlier on the 3 spheres.
Yeah.
We're not advocating that one sphere should control the other spheres.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Good point.
And I think the reason you're bringing that up is because when a lot of people hear this conversation, they say, oh, so you want the church to run everything.
Yes.
And so it's all about power and domination and control by the church. And what you're saying is that is not what we are advocating.
No, we're advocating for God to be over all things. And in a proper government, rules at the permission of the people.
Actually, what we're advocating for, I think, is proper sphere sovereignty.
Yeah.
Right?
I would agree with
that. So each sphere should be doing what they're supposed to do. And so it's not really this, it almost gets characterized as it's inward versus outward.
Yeah.
And I don't think it has to be one or the other. And that's what we were talking about last night is like, you can be a pastor who is, preaching the word, expositing it, going through the book, and also preach outside the 4 walls through means like this right here. Through, we were talking about one of the people that we're going to go see today is Dusty Devers at the Founders Conference. And like he ran for Senate because he truly believes in the idea of a nation honoring God.
Yeah.
And he's a pastor.
Well, and that's if you go through history, pastors would typically be in governmental positions.
Right.
In a lot of towns, a lot of neighborhoods. It wasn't really until the dispensational movement and why polish brass and we just need to do our job and this separation from church and state, which there are Christians who act like it's a biblical statement. There's a separation of sphere of authority, but there's not a separation from being under Christ.
Mm-hmm.
The government answers to Christ. Your family answers to Christ. The church answers to Christ. And that was something that was understood. So the church would declare to the state, you're disobeying God.
Mm-hmm.
Would declare to the family. The families would then declare to the state, we are made in his image. You don't have the right to boss us around that way.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a crossover and misunderstanding because all Christians that are biblically founded Christians would be at least a general equity theonomist.
Yeah.
Okay. So theonomy.
I was like, you have to define it. He's going to say
theonomy. Let me define it. Robbie put his finger up. So the question is, and I'm going to put it, instead of defining it in a rigid way, theonomy would be the Old Testament law. God does not change. What God says, God is always, and God has, of course, 3 parts of the law. He has the moral, the civil, and not every part of the law would apply to everybody. But since God does not change, his principles by which we are societies to run and to be ruled should still stand. And laws and nations should follow the Old Testament foundation for moral. So general equity.
For moral, though, that's the key right there is, there's different, then you sort of have to start talking about the different types of law.
That's where, people get mad. They're like, Old Testament law has no place.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. But general equity would say, and Greg Bonsom, he's one of our favorite general equity theonomists. He would say something like, the Old Testament civil laws and stuff don't necessarily directly apply to us, but the moral principles that are found in it are a basis of tell us who God is, and it should be the foundation of any good society, any equitable society. And I would agree with it. Now, you have, like some of the guys we run with are dominion theonomists.
Yeah.
They're saying, no, the law of God should have absolute, application where it can.
Yeah.
And that, yes, there's some parts of the civil law that aren't necessarily written to us, but God wants government ran that way.
Yeah.
where the general equities would say, no, that was Israel. They were a theonomy. We're not a theonomy.
Yeah, we would probably all agree that ceremonial law is
in
gone.
Christ Jesus.
Right.
I'm sorry, I was getting my lamb ready for sacrifice. What were you saying?
except for Bob here. Bob, that's a B name. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bob.
Yeah. We'll have to remember that one. Yeah. So I mean, ultimately, ceremonial. We'll put that away.
And by ceremonial, we mean the
feast, the sacrifice.
the feast, the sacrifices, the temple worship of the Old Testament. You don't really hear too many people advocating to bring that type of thing back, right? And applying that to today. What we're talking about, and then, of course, you do have the morals. You have the, 10 Commandments, for instance. Very few conservative Christians would advocate for getting rid of those morals, right?
Yeah.
The issue, I guess, at hand would be that third category there, which would be the civil laws of Israel.
Right.
So here's how I kind of view this, and you guys tell me what you think. So to me, the civil laws, the civil laws of Israel, and by that I mean exactly how their government functioned. A lot of those laws were based upon the principles of the moral law.
Yes.
Certainly.
Okay. And so
it was an application of it.
Right. It was an application of the moral law. But the application that God gave them was given at a particular time and place to a particular nation that was a straight out theocracy.
Mm-hmm.
We don't live in that time and place.
Yeah.
And we don't live in a theocracy in that sense. And so but we should have these same principles. They're going to look a little bit different because we're in a different time and place in a different situation. But the principles, though, would be the same.
Yeah. Well, and see, this is a spectrum, and we're laying a foundation. Because
actually, can we pause right there for just 1 second, because we got Vic with us, back with us again today, and the reason I'm asking this is big disappointment.
Big disappointment.
Yeah, big disappointment.
Your mother did not love you.
Big disappointment.
She's prophetic.
Yes.
She knew ahead of time. No. So do you understand the three parts of the law? When we say ceremonial, civic, and moral law, does that make sense to you? Because if not, maybe we need to define it even better.
Well, I think that's kind of what we were trying to do.
But again, he's been sitting here.
Yeah, so like Robbie says, can you define that for me?
So I'll start with moral law. Moral law would be 10 Commandments, right?
Don't murder, don't kill, don't bear false witness, don't lie, don't...
Right, and then Jesus takes it even further, and it says that it's also the spirit, like don't hate your neighbor. That's the moral law.
Mm-hmm.
You just defined the civic law, but summarize it again. Or no, you defined ceremonial, didn't you?
I think I did both.
Okay. I wasn't listening. Sorry, I'm a big disappointment.
Civil law would be like the laws directly for the government of Israel, like in the Old Testament. Like they had particular laws where if your animal kills somebody else's animal, like what do you do in that situation?
Right.
Or what do you do if someone, if someone is murdered, what is the exact process on how to do it?
It even had building code in the Old Testament. Like for instance, in the Old Testament, if you had a second floor, you had to have what they called a parapet, which is basically a railing.
Yeah.
And that if you did not have a railing on your house and somebody fell off it and died, you're guilty of their death.
Yeah.
And so the concept of manslaughter.
Where are these found?
Old Testament.
And Leviticus.
That's all part of the
mainly.
civil
Exodus, Leviticus, maybe some Numbers, Deuteronomy for sure, yeah.
Civil law were laws given to order society for the commonwealth of the people.
So you do that as a United States citizen, as a Florida citizen, as a person who works in business. You have all kinds of laws that you have to go by. Those are civil laws.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, it's almost like when you reach out to an attorney, they have to be a civil attorney for them to take your case.
Right.
And, in the New Testament, it sometimes talks about Jesus talking to lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing you have to ask is, well, is that the same as lawyers like that we think of today, or is that something different? And it's kind of yes and no, because they were experts at their law.
Yeah.
But where was their law found?
Some things haven't changed, too. It's very rare to find a lawyer either then or now with hands in their own pockets.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So things never change.
Some things never change.
Yeah. And then ceremonial law was like the sacrificial laws, like when to offer sacrifices, what type of sacrifice, would
these were
would
all,
Sabbath would still fall in moral, but is it also ceremonial?
Sabbath is the only one of the law that shows up in creation.
Okay.
It shows up in ceremonial and it shows up in moral, which is the reason why as New Testament Christians, we can apply it on the moral side as the Lord's Day on Sunday.
It's also why it's somewhat of an area of controversy
amongst Christians. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
But ceremonial, pretty much anything that was a shadow or a picture of Christ, God commanded them to do to look towards Christ. Blood had to be shed for the remission of sins. You had the scapegoat. Somebody had to take the blame from your sins, and God had to recognize forgiveness. You were to offer the sacrifice, blood would be spilled, and after the blood would be spilled, wine would be poured out because joy and acceptance from God was present. So these things were all shadows that when Christ came, he was the Passover lamb. Mm-hmm. He was the final sacrifice. He was poured out for us. He said that on the cross. So he did all these things for us. And so Christians don't really argue about the ceremonial law because we see it fully fulfilled in Christ Jesus. But that's not entirely true. Some of them argue we should be doing cedars and everything else.
Right. Like the meals and all that. Yeah.
But those are all fulfilled in Christ Jesus. There's no command to do those anymore.
So. Okay. So that's good. I think we summarized those. So going back to what we started at the outset, right? The defining priorities. So we're talking about the two different types of the outward facing pastor and the inward facing. So I'm going to define and tell me where I'm wrong or where I could edit it. But so the outward facing pastor, that would be the one that is accused of being maybe too Christian nationalist, sees Christ as king now, mm-hmm. the Great Commission as cultural, not just individual. Not to say that it isn't individual. I think they did a really good job at the conference talking about that yesterday. Like it is individual, but it's also more than that. And so the cultural mandate is still operative for us, meaning we should still be going, therefore, and making disciples of all the nations, multiplying, doing all the things that we see there in Genesis. The church exists to form men and women who shape institutions. We are to try and influence law, economics, education, and public morality where possible, and then extend Christian obedience into every sphere.
Do you want me to give the other argument?
Sure. First, do we want to? Is there anything that one's missing, you think?
No, I think that, and again, that's a spectrum because you have men that are common equity guys that would agree with that statement, and then you have guys that are more like Christian Reconstructionists or Dominion guys who would also agree with that statement.
Right. Okay.
And I have no problem with either one of those guys because I think that they are more in line with Scripture.
Okay.
And it's funny because I'm not a full Christian Reconstructionist.
But you right.
You are closer to Reconstructionists than I am.
Yeah.
But I'm probably closer on the spectrum of the Reconstructionists than most pastors.
Right.
With that being said, I can give you the other position from what I was raised in. And
can I just say something about that? Just to kind of explain this a little bit deeper about what we're talking about here. Is one of the things that you mentioned culture a lot, like the way people live, the way people think, that type of thing. And one of the things you said is that Christ is king now.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're a Christian and any kind of type of conservative Christian that believes the Bible, you believe that Jesus will return someday.
Yeah.
Okay. And at that point, Jesus will be king of this earth.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, everybody would say that Jesus is going to be king then, and that everybody's going to have to listen to him and obey him, and he's going to rule all things. The question is, what about right now?
That's the whole question.
Okay.
Yes.
Is Jesus king right now? Does everybody have to follow him right now? And I think most Christians would say, in fact, all real Christians would say, well, of course I need to follow him in my life, in my individual personal life, in my heart. But what about, and that's why we're talking about outward facing here, what about everything else?
Yeah.
What about everybody else?
What about everybody else? But what about everything else in this world?
Not just their hearts. What it's really saying is their heart is a part of it. You're wanting to change hearts. You're wanting people to turn to God. But as they do, we would expect them to be obedient to God's laws too.
Yeah, and see, we're dealing with the same thing we've always deal with. And it's funny, it's a common thread through our ministry. The world is telling you, you keep your Jesus and your religion and your thoughts at home. You have freedom religion, you can keep it there, but don't you dare bring it into the public square. It's not for public discourse. This is a private matter of faith. And we're saying, no, God is not just God of my life. He's your God, whether you bow to him or not. And one day you will bow. And so I, out of love, am telling you, this is what God calls of men to do. And you need to repent. And so all Christians, if they're gospel sharing Christians, are in fact at least somewhat general. That's why I said if they're actually biblical, they're at least general equity theonomists. Do you think
it comes down to a difference in like the Kuyperian worldview, like every square inch, every domain?
Kuyperian. So Kuyperian is like Kuyperian and being a Christian nationalist. Those are actually two different categories.
Yeah.
It's the same side of the coin.
Yeah,
though.
right.
It's the every square inch is God's.
Yeah.
And I started off more Kuyperian and finding myself floating more and more nationalist. And I've been a nationalist, but spectrum wise.
Right.
So back to the other argument. So the other side is the pastor who says, you know what? God never called us to legislate morality, which we've talked about it. All legislation is a moral thing.
That's all it does is teach people how to do it. Yeah.
But the argument is you don't save the world by forcing them. Only Jesus can save them. Only Holy Spirit can turn them. Therefore, for us to flip the world upside down, I don't need to go be in Washington. I don't need to be at city council. I don't need to become a senator. I need to go knock doors, win souls, baptize people. And once we save enough people, the world will actually flip upside down. That's the other side of the argument.
Mm-hmm.
Do I flip the world upside down by physically pushing for moral truth and stuff, and then starting schools, starting things, and educating minds and pointing them to Christ young and giving them the gospel? Or do I just give them the gospel and let the rest follow?
That's really the argument. Yes and. Right?
Exactly.
That's what the reason I said at the outset that these are caricatures is because most people are probably in between those two. Right?
Yes. And, so they get mad at each other, but they're really in the same boat.
And I think that's one reason we have to talk about this, is because we talked about this kind of once before when we were talking about the spheres of sovereignty.
Yeah.
I think this was the third one that we talked about.
Yeah.
But I think the slight difference between the way we're talking about it now and the way we talked about it then is before was kind of a defense of this idea against secularists, against non-Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're kind of thinking about the different ways that Christians talk about it. So we're looking at it as more of a in-house type of argument.
Did you get to listen to any of the sphere sovereignty ones? Do you remember that? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. This is an in-house debate.
And
it really is what you're saying.
And some people would look at it and say, but Christianity is about the gospel and about personal morals.
Yes.
But what does Christianity have to do with law? What does it have to do with economics? What does it have to do with education?
Mm-hmm.
Like, aren't those like separate values that have nothing to do with religion?
Yeah.
And that is the way that many Christians do feel.
That's how they look at it.
Right. And so when people start talking in this more outward-facing way, they immediately start thinking, aren't you violating separation of church and state? Are you wanting to set up a state church? And there's a lot of misunderstanding. And part of the problem is not understanding that there is a wide spectrum of these beliefs and how they would apply.
Yeah. I would never advocate for a state church.
No. I wouldn't actually be opposed to it, but I wouldn't advocate for it.
Right.
And that's because...
What about a king, like a Christian king or a Christian prince? You guys heard that argument?
I'm not a pro-Christian prince. I think there's only one Christian king, Christ.
Mm-hmm.
I think the wisdom that our forefathers had in this republic, if it was actually being formed and shaped, because let's be honest, in our republic that we have, the president's basically a king.
Yeah.
Under checks and powers, but he only has 8 years at the most.
Right.
It's a little bit different. The way America was originally set up, we kind of had Christian princes at first.
Mm-hmm.
But then because Christians tend to be more, what's the word when we put up with other groups?
Not accepting.
But
yeah.
Patient. Patience, not
tolerant.
The right word. Tolerant.
Oh yeah, we hate that word so much.
Because of being
is that the royal we?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, because everybody else.
Tolerance, and because of lack of education and Christianity being slowly legislated out, which is from the feminine movement, and from a group that Robbie hates, that had a big influence. We'll talk about that another time. Yeah. Okay. So. Who founded all the NAACP and all that stuff?
Oh, okay.
Which group?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
I'm saying they're
Why
the
do
ones,
you hate them so
I don't.
much?
They're the ones that legislate it and put into law that you could not ask whether you were a Christian for government positions. You could not ask if you were a Christian to hire. You could. And when they did that in society, they slowly took it all over.
Yeah. I think it was John Adams who said that the nation can really only last if it's a moral people.
Yes.
And the way that it's set up now. And so knowing where we're at, some people are making the argument that, okay, the Democratic Republic can't really last this way.
No,
if we don't all have the same moral values, which is part of the conversation that we had about the immigration, and stuff like that, is like, do we all share the same morals?
Private
conversation? Yeah,
no splintered society will stand very long.
Right. If you have different moral values, it's hard to come to the same table and try to create.
They're making the argument that we have moral values by legislation. That's the argument they're making.
Right.
And of course, their legislation would say that abortion is moral. And we're going, no, God, you're going to answer to God for that one day. And it's like, you need to keep church and state out of it. And so then you have, on the other flip side of the coin, you have the Satanic Church coming out and saying, no, abortion is one of our precepts and rights.
Sacraments.
And it's a sacrament. Therefore, it's a religious right. And so now the same liberals who were arguing this was neutrality are defending the Satanist. So, I mean, that's the thing. You cannot have a tolerant society that does not have the same moral values and cultures that will not eventually fall.
I guess what you're saying is there have to be lines drawn somewhere.
Yeah. And that's the reason why there's groups of pastors that are rising up saying we need to get back into politics. We need to start schools. Yeah. We need to lay a foundation, because
laws catechize.
Yes,
they do. I mean, they teach what, think about it. A lot of times we'll talk about like sin tax on alcohol, on tobacco, on guns, on anything that the government doesn't want.
They want to discourage.
Yeah, they want to discourage, so they tax it more. And so the point is trying to teach you shouldn't do these things is ultimately what it's trying to say. And so laws catechize, and so if we know that to be true, we believe that to be true, then we should want to affect the laws. It's a natural outgrowth.
At the very least.
Yeah.
A lot of people, if you quote scripture when you're talking about a justification for the law, some people will criticize that and they might throw out violating separation of church and state. They might throw out, they'd probably throw out the term Christian nationalist as a pejorative. But you can quote virtually anybody else, just not the Bible.
Yeah.
And so what I would advocate is, depending on how you're hearing this, at the very least, if someone can quote, I'm just going to throw out some political philosophers here, but if you can quote John Locke, if you can quote someone like Karl Marx, why can't you quote Moses? Why can't you quote Jesus?
Yeah.
At the very least, if we're going to talk about a democracy and free speech as a battle of ideas, and that those ideas are going to create government institutions, private institutions, create laws, why can't the Bible also be used in the battle of public ideas, especially if you're a Christian, because you believe it's the truth?
Well, and the only reason that we're not allowed to do that is because of the two-story view that we've talked about in the podcast before, that like you're not allowed to bring your religion into the public sphere because it's not true truth. Like things that are true truth are science and, reasoning and logic. And it's like we've allowed that to be pushed out so much that now we're having to try to advocate for being able to use it as truth, as a reasoning for why we want to do what we want to do. And so now we're having to make the argument to start with that we should be allowed to use the Bible. And because of that, then you're already you're already behind the 8 ball. And so what I think a lot of the Christian nationalist guys are doing, and I would like to think that in a very, 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 very small way, we're sort of doing some of that too.
If the Lord wills, maybe bigger one day.
Yeah. Is advocating for sort of shifting the Overton window, right? Moving the conversation to where we don't have to anymore say, well, the Bible says this and therefore. We're assuming that the Bible is the grand truth. It's the true truth. It's the one that legislates everything. And so it is our guiding light. And the hard part is the inward focused guys would say the same thing, right? They're just thinking, okay, our job as the church is to guard doctrine, to shepherd souls, and to prepare people for suffering and eternity.
And some of those inward-facing guys would even say that they hope that young men and even maybe young women, but more particularly young men, grow up in their church and end up in government positions and rule.
Do they, though? I hadn't really seen that much.
Yeah, I mean, even when I grew up, I mean, I remember where I was a youth pastor, it was kind of like, we prayed that God raises up godly leaders for our nation and our church, but they didn't really push young men to actually become those type of leaders.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like a theoretical, like it would be good.
Yeah.
Should we maybe introduce in more detail the inward facing instinct, and then maybe we can go back and compare the two?
I'd love for you to do that.
Okay. So the inward facing pastor, in other words, outward would be looking outside of the church walls into culture and society and laws and all that stuff. People who would be more just inward facing would see that the church is a pilgrim people. And by pilgrim, we mean that we are foreigners in this world. Okay, the world has its own society and culture and values. However, the church is something different.
Yeah, in the world,
we don't
not
fit
of
in.
the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That this whole world, it's against us, but it's not going to last.
Right.
And so we just need to follow the truth, and we just let whatever's going on outside of the walls just kind of happen.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? We hope it's good, but if it's not, then it is what it is. And so we just to kind of ignore that, and we focus on our own personal faithfulness, holiness, focus on the gospel, focus on our own personal living. And so the church is definitely about giving the gospel, teaching doctrine, shepherding the people within the church, and keeping a focus on eternity, knowing that we may suffer in this life. And so people on the outward facing, I don't think really generally have a problem with any of those things I just mentioned. There can be a danger that I think we'll get to where you can be so overly focused on that outward stuff that you miss that inside stuff.
Inside stuff, for sure.
So, but the real question is it just inside the church, or does what we teach also influence the outside stuff? And should we really be promoting our people to do that? And I actually think this is kind of a weird question, because if you ask the average evangelical Christian, do you want more people to turn to Christ and trust in Christ and get saved? They would say yes. Okay. Once they trust in Christ, do you want to see them baptized and growing in the scriptures in the church? And they'd say yes, absolutely. But then what do people then do once church is over? They leave the church walls and they go out into society. Mm-hmm. And by just the way life works, you're going to be involved in institutions. You're going to be involved in work. Politics and government and laws affect your life. Mm-hmm. And we live in I'm going to say democracy. I know it's a republic, and so I understand all that. But just to make it easier, I'm gonna say we live in a democracy where we are encouraged to stay informed and to vote and to get involved. And so if you win enough people to Christ, like I think every Christian wants to see, and they're starting to live and think like Christians more and more, won't that impact society more and more? I mean, if you have a business and half the people that were not believers before become believers, is that not going to impact how the business is run?
Right. If you're operating as a believer,
if you are working in government and you become a believer and you're growing in your church, is not your policies going to be shaped by that?
By what you believe.
Right. Yeah. And so the more and more people who come to know Jesus and grow in the Lord, it's going to have to affect those things. And I realize we try to create a wall between them, but it's a very, very artificial wall.
Yes.
And I especially take former President Joe Biden. Okay. He says he's Catholic, right? But yet as a president, to a degree as a senator, but especially as a president, he advocated things that directly went against the teachings of his church. And he doesn't even go to a church that really allows differences of opinion on these big issues. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have official doctrines from the Pope, from the church, right? Uh-huh. And yet he advocates for policies like abortion, gay marriage, that he leaned heavily.
Gay marriage.
He leaned heavily into the trans stuff when he was president. And how can you say you are a follower of this church and then completely defy what it says?
Yeah.
But many evangelical Christians aren't saying it that way, but they're kind of saying,
well,
maybe our leadership.
I think, though, the reason they're able to do that is because of their inward application, right? They're thinking, okay, now I'm not saying this is Joe Biden. I actually just don't think Joe Biden has any morals at all. I don't even think he's probably a Christian, but that's not for me to say
I think
one way or the other. Huh? Robot?
He's a walking corpse.
But a Christian who is really focused on the inward perspective is thinking, okay, my job is to kill sin, to love my family, and to be faithful where I'm at. And that what the problem is, where they think they're at is their role is in the home or maybe in the church, but it doesn't really extend outside of that.
So their private life, not their
private life, and so they've bought that 2-story view, hook, line, and sinker, right? They've said, oh, okay, I can be a priest in my own home, but I can't do that outside of the home.
Yeah,
and so
that's
they're
a lie.
And right, and they're that mindset is that bunker down, like prepare for suffering, don't get distracted by the worldly things.
Yeah.
Whereas an outward perspective says, okay, all of that is true.
Yeah,
that we are to do that in home, but we also have to live righteously in public, and we have to order our household as a witness to the public.
The most simple argument would be Matthew 28:18-20.
Yeah.
All authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. Jesus doesn't say some authority. He doesn't say the authority of the church. He doesn't say the authority of only the elect. He said all authority has been given to me in heaven and in earth. In other words, all spheres of authority are his. And then he uses that phrase, therefore. And anytime you see therefore, you know, this is one of those captions. You have to ask why the therefore is therefore. What's it there for? And he says, go ye therefore and teach all nations.
Yeah.
And so the commandment of the Great Commission is not a let's just have dominion in our backyard and in our homes. The commandment of the Great Commission is seek dominion for the Lord, not our dominion, the Lord's dominion over the nations. And the question then is, how is this done? Yep. The closed preacher would say we do it by the gospel slowly and faithfully. The more dominion preacher or Christian, Reconstructionist would say...
I think outward is the word we're using for this.
Yeah. Outward preacher would say, you're right, outward, not, the outward preacher would say, yes, you do it by the gospel, but we also do it by legislating for things that will encourage the gospel, encourage morality, and push a people towards.
That's right. We're going to engage unjust systems. We're going to build Christian institutions. We're going to take responsibility for the ground that we occupy.
I think that's why the inward. So, and I know our Reformed brothers who are inward would get mad at me for saying this.
Okay.
The inward movement, we're not saying inward. Inward movement.
Only Vic can do that.
Inward movement. Vic's the only one allowed to say it.
Yeah, right.
He's Spanish.
% black.
2%.
The inward movement had its heyday in dispensationalism. Everything's falling apart. Things are going to get worse. God said it's going to get worse. Therefore, our job is not to try to flip the world upside down, because we're not going to flip the world upside down. We want to win as many souls as we can while things burn.
So it almost, and you can see that, like as I think about it, if that's what I thought, that would be the natural outgrowth. If you thought that it was going to get worse, you'd be a fool not to try to be teaching your people to prepare for suffering, to focus on your family, make sure you're good, kill your sin. Be ready. He's coming back soon.
It's going to get bad.
It could be this week, right? And so, it's the natural outgrowth is that, you're going to be more pessimistic.
I would say that, to be fair, I grew up in dispensational churches that had that kind of view, but they were very saying go vote, and they were opposed to gay marriage, which at the time was illegal.
If the election happens, if the world doesn't end before the election happens,
well, right? Yeah, but I'm just trying to be fair here that they did say things.
But the argument used to be more like Kuyperian, build where you're at, but you're still going to spread your garden, grow a little bit. Rush Nooney, let's Christian nationalism outward. The world has to bow to Christ. Basson, the moral truth of God, or Bonsom, I'm always saying his name. The moral truth of God applies to everybody, and we should call them by the law so that we can give them the gospel. And so the argument used to be all outward arguments, but different levels of outward arguments. Now the argument has shifted from, are you an inward focusing pastor or an outward focusing pastor?
Well, thinking about church fathers, right? Like let's go back 500 years or more. Okay. I mean, I know that's not even
that would be church
back.
fathers.
Right. I'm just saying, like,
so you're talking about like Reformation?
Yeah, Reformation and further back than that.
Okay.
Was there anybody that was, and I'm guessing there were, I just haven't really studied enough to know, but like, was there anybody that was like thinking that the world's getting ready to end? And just inward focus like that?
Christ would come back anymore. And that's always been.
Yeah, for sure.
But the focus was kingdom building. But you got to understand what their hegemony, what their culture was. You had kings and you had state-appointed churches.
Yeah.
So in their mind, the kingdom was already starting to grow, and it's just going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
Or before the Reformation, you had like one or two churches, and so you had different nations, but you had the church that was over all those nations. Church, or after the split with the Orthodox.
There's not a lot written on the subject because I don't think they foresaw the lie of neutrality. Creating what is created in our culture, because cultures were either pagan, Hindu, Christian. They were something.
Yeah.
Now this lie of neutrality says all we're nothing,
secularism,
which is a religion to itself.
Right.
They never seen that coming.
Yeah.
I think that's why you don't see much written on it.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I mean, summarizing again, one trains people to endure, resist compromise, remain faithful under pressure. The other teaches men to build, to lead, to govern, to take responsibility for outcomes. And I don't think that these are enemies, but they're definitely not identical. And so do we want to, go ahead, were you going to say something? Okay, I was going to say, do we want to flesh out like the church as a sanctuary model, kind of that inward focused person? You know, they believe that the church is a refuge. It's a countercultural embassy, if you will.
You know, I think thinking about history, I think there has been a little bit of this always in Christian history, because very early on, when Christianity started to be institutionalized as being, the official church of the Roman Empire and stuff, there were always people who said church has become mainstream and it has been corrupted by it. And so people would, I think we mentioned a little bit of this at that time, where people would go out and live in caves. And I think, Austin, you mentioned people going up and living on poles, and we were talking about asceticism at the time, but this idea that we need to live away from society and not engaged in it. Even in Jesus's day,
Christian separation.
Even in Jesus's day, in like the Judaism that was in existence in the day, they had the different sects. You had like the Pharisees and Sadducees, but you also had a group called the Essenes that were the ones who did the copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls that sometimes you hear about. They lived out away from everybody else, saying, look, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all these other people, they're all corrupt because they're living in society and they're engaging with society. And so we're going to live out separate, and we're going to be entirely holy,
and we're going to be fully clean,
and completely unspotted. And then going back into the more Christian era, then, of course, the idea of living out by yourself became kind of officialized and institutionalized by the church, and you had like monasteries and convents and stuff where people could go out and completely separate from the world, and that was like considered to be a holier status because you were living in these buildings, you weren't engaging with anybody, you became a monk. That's kind of what Martin Luther, ended up doing, and that way you could completely focus all of your life on the things of God and not engage with society.
It's interesting, though, that like you're saying that, and I'm going, they still had some positive impacts on the world, though. Yeah. Even though they were really focused inward, they still had impacts. I mean, they would create different things. I mean, they'd made some really good beers.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah.
I guess we just solved it. Right there.
So really, that's it.
But also, they actually made a lot of technological achievements. Yeah. They copied manuscripts that would be a blessing to people later on. And there were people eventually who said, let's take our learning. I believe that's the difference between a monk and a friar, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Was that they, don't quote me on that, but it's like Robin Hood, you have like Friar Tuck and stuff like that.
I totally believe you.
I'm just going to sound confident.
You sound very confident, yeah.
And they would actually go out and actually try to like teach people and
the friars would?
Yeah, I believe that, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've read
so they
that,
were Christian nationalist monks.
Well, not nationalist because
there was no Christian nationalism.
Right.
Christian nationalism was the norm.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you wouldn't. The reason we have that type of terminology is because you have people who are not nationalists.
Yeah.
And you have people, which back then some people weren't necessarily nationalists.
Are you going to define nationalism?
All right, let me play devil's advocate.
Well, I don't think that's a bigger conversation.
Since we're on that subject, devil's advocate.
Yeah.
How did that play out? That version of Christian nationalism existing. How did that play out for the Puritans and the Baptists?
Not well.
They had to run. They had to be on the run all the time.
Yeah.
Because they were getting pushed out.
That's the reason why I think most Reformed Baptist brethren are against the concept of a Christian prince, if you will.
Okay.
Because historically, that has never, ever in history been good for the church.
Okay, so what's interesting about that, though, is, and that's fair. That's all true. There's no Christian prince now, and they're still getting pushed out.
Everybody's getting pushed out.
Correct.
Though. Yeah.
Correct.
Everybody's getting pushed out.
So I think this resistance is kind of sort of one of those like things
I'm
that happen.
not pro-Christian prince other than Christ.
When you say Christian prince, do you mean actually like having a monarchy that's officially Christian?
Yeah.
Like, say, Britain was before the parliament had more say than the prime minister
and see,
had
that's
more
a big
say?
push by those guys at King's Hall, the concept of a Christian prince. And they're Christian Reconstructionists.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, full out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're my brothers, and I don't think it's a subject worth arguing over because...
I love to argue.
Because, well, my mind is, it's funny. I listen to these things in history. You got these monks in isolation. You have these monks going out. You have these Jews in isolation. These Jews going... And I look at the history and how it's all played out with 2020 vision going, holy cow, Christ worked in all this for a purpose in history.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder if these divisions are part of God's symphony being played out.
Or
maybe,
is it maybe that sometimes God just called different people
to do
different things?
Yeah.
And they all need to be done. There needs to be some people sitting, focusing on the Lord and copying manuscript. And of course, I'm talking a couple, hundreds of years ago. But then there also need to be some people who took that outside of that.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying right there, both of you. I mean, I think what we should ultimately want is more Christians, right? Who are obeying whatever God has called them to do. And so to your point, Robbie, like some people might be called to be in the Senate. Some people might be called to do a podcast. Some people might be called to do none of that.
And that's where my mindset is as a pastor. I want men in my church to rise up to local government, lower magistrate particularly, and possibly even upper. But lower magistrate
has a lot
is
of
where you start, because if we don't legislate, they're going to legislate. And it's all evil. And God curses nations with these evil legislations. I want my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren to grow up in a prosperous nation.
I want them to be able to grow up in a nation where they can be Christian without being murdered.
Exactly. So I think we have to be outward
We're not there
focusing.
yet. I'm not saying we're there yet, by the way. I'm just saying,
but
I can see.
Let me ask the historicist here. The nations that went anti-God and then rose up against their government and went back, because all communist nations go anti-God, like Russia. When they came back, they went from one extreme, anti-God, back to state church.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Because there's more freedom. I trust, Doug Wilson said this, I trust my Christian brothers in authority protecting my freedom, even though they might legislate things I would disagree with, more than I do the secularists who think I shouldn't exist.
And here's the interesting thing. Because of that, even if you're not a Christian, you'll actually have more freedom.
Yeah.
So people that are outside of the Christian religion actually still have more freedom in Christian countries than we would in a non-Christian country.
Christians have the tendency to protect non-Christians.
Yeah.
Non-Christians throughout history have the tendency to try to want to snuff out the Christians. I mean, history has played that over and over again.
Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of goes to what you're just saying, Austin, is that nations that kind of rejected their Christian past end up going into a kind of chaos and persecution, whether you're looking at the Russian Revolution that ended up embracing communism, whether you're even talking about the French Revolution.
Yeah, I forgot the French.
Which didn't go into communism, but went through a very dark period. Mm-hmm. And so it creates a lot of problems. I think like state church, and I and Christian Prince, like I see a lot of problems with that. Of course, I definitely see a problem with quote unquote secularism. I think when the church is preaching the gospel, discipling the people, when you disciple the people, you disciple the culture. When you disciple the culture and you live in a society where people are able to vote for their leaders to some degree, then you will affect how they vote, and that will create good, godly government.
So going there, though, if it creates good, godly government, what do you do when those Christians start actually creating laws that, you said you have a problem with, like the Christian Prince, and you don't have to go into all that, but like if you have more Christians in office and they start creating laws that are God honoring laws,
mm-hmm.
where does your problem with Christian Prince arrive? Like at what point is it okay for the Christians to be creating laws, but like not okay for to have a Christian
I don't
Prince?
think he's anti-Christians being in charge. He's anti-monarchy.
Right. Yeah. That's what I mean.
Why?
Yeah.
Why am I anti-monarchy?
Yeah.
Well,
if it was a Christian monarch.
Well, this is less of a...
England's a Christian monarch.
No, I'm talking about a real Christian monarch. Real one.
But why is Britain not? Because the king has no power? Is that what you mean?
No, they have true power. They just vested all in their
Parliament.
But
which is what you're saying. Yeah.
But like, okay, actually, Britain's a very good example because the head of, because their king or queen, whatever they happen to have at the time, is given the title Defender of the Faith.
Yeah,
that's inherited from King Henry VIII.
Yeah,
and the problem is that Queen Elizabeth II, from everything I know, was actually a real dedicated queen.
Yeah.
Her son, that's now on the throne, is not.
Yeah,
he's the Biden.
And the thing is, there's nothing that's structured in their laws that allows them to now say we have a fake Christian prince.
Yes,
and we can't, and there's nothing they can do about it.
And even in the Old Testament, the kings, like when David was declared king years before he became king, and even after Saul was
he was still on the run.
Even when Saul was overthrown, he did not get his authority until the elders gave him his authority.
That's right.
So that's what, like, I'm against the concept of Christian prince as far as like
an
unlimited monarchy. But that's where like a republic like what we have could have a quote unquote, if we were a Christian nation with Christian laws that said you had to be a Christian in order to serve in government, then I would be okay with that, because then you have a
checks and balances on that.
You have a king who don't think he's Christ, don't think he's head of the church, who can be overthrown and put up with another one if he fails.
Yeah.
That's why, like, I'm not a big fan of the Christian monarchy, because there's not a man who will be born among men who can rule in true honor to God with that much power other than Christ himself.
Yeah, sure.
Because the church has not been given the job to rule the nation.
Right.
Here's what they have given the job to do, though. This is from 2 Corinthians chapter 10, in verse 3. It says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have the divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete."
Amen.
And so the idea there is, it says that we do not war against the flesh. So the church does not have armies that are trying to force people into believing. But we do fight. It says that our weapons of warfare are not of the flesh. In other words, they're not physical. But we do have divine power to destroy strongholds. A stronghold will be like a castle or a fortification. What kind of fortifications are there? We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. And so the church ought to declare war on bad ideas.
Yeah.
Unbiblical ideas, unwise ideas. And if the church is calling people to Christ, discipling them, they can talk about the issues that are going on in culture and in government and in any other institution. And they have the not just the right, but the commandment to speak on those ideas and attack them and bring them down and undermine them, so that the people in the church, yes, in their everyday lives and in their families, can live by the truth, but also so society at large can live by the church.
Yeah, and I'll give you so the Bible, and I think this is every argument we have internally, we have it because there's actually a biblical tension. Okay, like 1 Peter 2:11 through 12. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, to keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. So he's talking to Christian Jews that you're exiles, your job is to be honorable and be that example. Or Hebrews 13:14, for we have no lasting city, but we seek a city that is to come. So I believe the Bible teaches both the church does take dominion and Christ comes back after every enemy's been put under his foot. So in that case, I have to be somewhat outward. But I also would agree with R.C. Sproul, who was like a common, well, he said the church was first called to be holy before it's called to be influential. And so I think there's a tension there. And I think that's the reason why this is a good argument for us to have. And I think, honestly, I think we're going to stand back in history. I think our children are going to stand back 100 years from now and go, oh, you had these hard reformers, you had these, and they were arguing, but they both preserved different things, and look what we have left because of it.
Hopefully.
That's what I'm praying.
So can we talk about the risks of each side? So the risks on the inward focus is withdrawal, right? Withdrawal from society, potentially being too passive, and maybe confusing faithfulness with isolation or inward focus, right? So, and then the way I see it, the risk with being too far outward focus is overreaching outside of your sphere, right? Explaining everything in political terms, not being able to have a sermon without, right. And then losing our distinctiveness as Christians. And so I think both of those are real risks. And so the question isn't whether the church engages the culture, it's whether engagement is expected, whether we're equipping people for it, and whether it's, blessed to do so. Okay. So what do you guys think about, we've got a section here called What Does Shepherding Look Like on Monday? And so how does this play out if you're shepherding your people? If you're, Austin, you've obviously been around a lot of pastors. You've been doing this for a long time. What is an inward focus shepherd? What is he doing in his day-to-day outside of Sunday morning?
I think the inward and outward faithful men are doing the same thing.
Really? Okay. So there's not much difference.
They're tending to the command of the eldership in prayer and study and discipleship.
Okay. I don't disagree with that. I think they're definitely doing that, but and maybe I'm off base here. I've not done this, but
and see, you have, like, they're both doing the same thing. The question is what are they doing extracurricular that's different?
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Like, so for instance, if you're outward focused, you might be writing a book, or you might be going, okay, I'm going to go, on a podcast circuit and go talk to these different things.
Outward men and inward men, like John MacArthur.
Right. John MacArthur, they both write. They both do some of that.
Published a lot of books.
Yeah.
I think if they're following the Bible and being faithful, they're going to be doing very similar things. What it is you have the Jeff Durbins. Durbin would be an outward pastor.
Yes. He's at the abortion.
He's at the abortion mills. He's showing up in the Senate, pushing for legislation to abolish abortion. And he's taken abolitionist position, which is funny because you have Doug Wilson, who's an outward. Yeah. You have Jeff Durbin, who's an outward. Jeff Durbin's an abolitionist. We shouldn't incrementally outlaw.
Wilson is.
We should just outlaw it.
Incremental.
Yeah. So Doug Wilson say, no, we push little legislation as we can. Yeah. Make abortion illegal after 9 months. That's a victory for us. Make abortion after this. And where you have Jeff Durbin saying, no, it's all sin, and a Christian cannot advocate for sin. Abortion should be illegal, and those who do it should be charged with murder. So they have very different views, but I love them both.
So where am I wrong then? Because what I was thinking.
Oh, wow. That's a huge thing, right?
Robbie, I wasn't talking to you.
Okay,
I was
sorry.
I know you can tell me. No, I'm kidding. Because it does sound like I was a little bit off base in thinking this, but I felt like an inward focused pastor would be really heavy emphasis on counseling, protecting his people, going and seeing people, doing the hospital visits, doing all the, keeping doctrinal
a
faithfulness, whereas
yes.
An outward focus would be, like you said with Durbin, would be, so for instance, let's say you got a really inward focused guy.
Yeah.
What is he going to say about Durbin being on the steps and going to the abortion clinics and stuff like that?
Most of the inward focusing guys I know are grateful for Durbin's work, but most of them aren't abolitionists. They're okay with.
Okay, that is Durbin's cause, abolition. Yeah. Let's say a different topic.
That's an abolition, a complete end to abortion.
Abortion, right?
I just bring that
abolish
up
abortion. Yeah,
abolition historically in America has a different meaning, and people be like, I'm pretty sure slavery's over. What are we advocating for? So yeah, but we're talking about abolishing abortion.
Yes,
yeah. So I'm saying take a different topic. Pick a different topic than that, because that is his sole cause, pretty much.
Well, here's one that you would see argument on the inside: whether Bible should be in the public school, whether public school should exist at all.
Which are two different
questions. But you have one group that's pushing for Bible to get into the public school. You have another group saying, no, public school shouldn't exist because neutrality does not exist.
I could see an inward-focused pastor, though, also starting churches and stuff like that because they would want to isolate or insulate.
Here's one.
Okay.
Here's what you're looking for. There's a lot of inward-focused pastors who will say, nowhere in the Bible does God command a church to start schools and colleges. Therefore, you're not doing the job. Churches should operate on the tithe only. And when a pastor does other things, he's being spread too thin, and it's not good for the church.
Right.
I don't agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
As a pastor, I pray that God allows us to have a college one day.
Right.
I want a tech school one day. I want to actually pour into the next generation of leaders that are going to lead my state and lead my grandchildren one day. So as a outward focusing pastor, I want generational foundations that are laid that will last. Where inward would say, no, we just win this generation, and then the next generation rises up and wins the next generation. They're not thinking in terms of institutes.
Maybe I'm struggling to articulate very well today, but
then you got John Piper and Johnny Mack, who both have schools and colleges.
Right. And
yeah,
so,
but those are Bible colleges, though, right?
Yes, that's true.
That's a good point.
So there's a certain mentality that might say, okay, Bible college, that's to train ministry workers, right? Or to train people in theology,
right.
But they might be less likely to open up something like
university,
right?
Yeah.
Like a Liberty University type thing
or
that
St.
goes,
Andrews or something.
yeah,
like that.
right.
Yeah. So help me out here. Do these types of ministries, inward and outward focus, do they produce different men?
Maybe different focuses, I think.
Okay.
Similar men, different passions.
Okay.
That's what I would say. And the thing is I was a product of an inward facing pastor.
Right.
And slowly became outward facing.
Well, and when you became outward facing, though, and it may not have just been the inward outward part that got you, but you sort of became a little bit of a pariah in your circles. Like you were a little bit of an outcast. Was it because you went outside, or was it
I was a pariah only over theology, because they would argue that they're outward facing because they run bus routes.
Yeah.
To they soul win every single day. I mean, and I would even say, even though they're not Dominion Christians at all, the church that I trained under had police chief, and we had mayors come to our services.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
the church I went to, that you went to the college for, they had at least one political figure come, and that was running for Congress.
Yeah, I believe on a Wednesday night.
This was a she that I was.
It was okay.
Of,
I met a guy spoke on Wednesday night.
Maybe
when
that
I was
happened
there.
Too.
Yeah.
Okay. So just maybe one last thought here. And we've talked a lot of eschatology.
I think the inward and outward people, it's two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
A lot of it, because they don't like the theology that's being espoused, but they're actually seeking for the same outcome.
Does it come back to preference, what people are comfortable with?
I think it's verbiage.
I think, too, that sometimes people that we might be describing as inward focusing actually don't have a problem with some of this stuff. Like, they would be fine if we got something that illegalized gay marriage or something like that. But I think that some people take some of this stuff far enough to where it makes them very uncomfortable to the degree to which they, or maybe the kind of laws they want passed. And so maybe it's less argument about should the government be influenced or culture, whatever, be influenced by Christianity, but how far and exactly what that would look like.
Yeah.
Because good people are going to come to different conclusions about this stuff. And some people are going to go far enough away from you that it's like, do I associate with them or do I condemn that?
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts there? I mean, we could talk eschatology and how it shapes it, but we've already done that a little bit.
We could talk about that till Jesus.
That's what. Yeah. So we've done that. We've done that numerous times. So let's conclude, but we're going to conclude a little bit differently. Okay. I'm gonna summarize, and then I'm gonna ask for feedback. Okay. So here's the closing question for the episode: when Christ transforms a man or a woman, where does that transformation go? Does it terminate in personal holiness, church health, and family order only? Or does it necessarily spill outward into economics, law, culture, power, responsibility? And so, dominion is not about conquest fantasies. It's about the obedience to refuse to stay private. And then faithfulness is not just what you believe, it's how far your obedience allows you to travel. So I guess I would say, what do you think? Right? That's the question for our listeners.
I think the truly redeemed are going to be affecting the culture, whether they're doing it knowingly or unknowingly. The difference will be in the culture we're raised in. Are you doing it on purpose? And I would hope at Grace Point, we're trying to raise people who do it on purpose. But all Christians, if Christ is truly king of their life, it's going to affect them.
Okay.
And it's going to affect the culture in whatever business they're in, whatever influence they garner.
All right. Well, Austin just answered for you listeners, so you don't have to respond.
Oh, you were asking.
Yeah, I was asking the listeners.
No. Okay, let's wait for the listeners to respond.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm a listener.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Give us an opinion.
So I'm a guest today, but I do listen to the podcast, and Austin hit it right on the nail. I mean, that would be my answer.
Okay. Good. I like it. Well, our listener has spoken.
He has spoken, yeah.
All right. Well, listen, stand firm, build faithfully, and let your household blaze as an altar to the King.